Hello there, and welcome to Science for Sleep, where we let curiosity get comfortable and science slow down enough to dream beside it. Tonight, we're turning inward, not to the stars or the ticking of distant clocks, but to something much closer. In fact, it may be the very thing that brought you here tonight. Memory. That gentle echo of everything you've seen, felt, tasted, or dreamed. It's what lets you remember your first bicycle, or forget where you put your keys. It's the reason a song can transport you back decades, or why the smell of toast can suddenly make you feel 6 years old again. Strange, isn't it? This invisible library we carry, this flickering film reel made of feelings and facts. So let me ask you, where are you listening from right now? And what's the very first memory that floats up when I ask? Is it vivid, blurry, emotional? Or do you have that tip of the tongue sensation, like something's just out of reach? If you find this little journey calming, curious, or comforting in the way a well-worn bedtime book might be, I'd be ever so grateful if you gave the video a like or subscribed. It helps this quiet corner reach others looking for rest, wonder, or maybe just a softer kind of science. So settle in, let your thoughts unwind gently, and let's begin. Because somewhere between neurons and nostalgia, between forgetting and forever, lies the story of memory. Memory is strange, not just because we forget things, but because we remember them in ways that feel so rich, so emotional, and yet so wildly unreliable. You don't remember your whole 10th birthday. You remember a flash, the colour of the icing, the crinkle of wrapping paper, maybe someone's laugh. You remember how the air smelled, or how your hands trembled with excitement. Or maybe not at all. Maybe it's only a photograph now, gently mislabeled by your mind as memory. A moment you've seen so many times in frames and stories, it feels like yours. That's the thing with memory. It isn't a recording, it's a reconstruction, a story we retell to ourselves, reshaped just slightly every time, and yet somehow it becomes who we are. Ask someone who they are, and they might say their name, their job, maybe where they live. But beneath all that is memory. The remembered decisions, the remembered dreams, the remembered self. We are in many ways stitched together by the act of remembering. A patchwork quilt of moments, some vivid, some forgotten, some entirely fictional, sewn into something we call identity. But it's not all grand and existential. It's also delightfully mundane. Why did you walk into the kitchen just now? Wait, weren't you going to look something up? What was it? Our daily lives are full of these tiny mental stumbles. The phone you pick up only to forget why. The sentence you start only to find it trailing off into mist. And then there are those odd little memory tricks. You can quote every line from a movie you haven't seen since you were 12, but you can't remember your coworker's name after being introduced 5 minutes ago. You forget where you left your keys, but your fingers remember the password to an account your brain insists it forgot. Sometimes you can't recall something until you stop trying, and then, as if summoned by silence, it reappears. Memory doesn't live on command. It prefers to wander in its own time. It's not just selective, it's contextual. That's why returning to your childhood home can flood you with recollections you didn't know you still had. The stairs creak, and suddenly you're back in pyjamas holding a bowl of cereal. The sound of birds in summer doesn't just make you feel calm, it brings back a feeling. Like light filtered through lace curtains, or grass pressed into the back of your legs. It's not just nostalgia, it's memory arriving by scent, sound, sensation. Scientists call this context-dependent memory. Your mind holds more than facts, it holds associations, and sometimes the right key can open a door you forgot was there. There's also emotional memory, those experiences stitched in with stronger thread. Moments of fear, of heartbreak, of joy. Your first kiss. A bad car accident. The words someone said that you never forgot, and never wanted to. These memories live deeper. Not always clearer, but somehow more durable, like they were burned into the film instead of printed on the surface. And yet, emotional memory is a strange actor. When you're scared, time seems to stretch, not because the moment is longer, but because your brain is working overtime, recording more detail. Later, when you recall it, it feels like it lasted forever. We measure memories not just in duration, but in density. Moments of intense focus, a speech, a performance, a crisis, are recorded in high resolution. Everyday routines, meanwhile, are filmed in fast forward. That's why time seems to accelerate as we age. When you're young, everything is new, and your brain records every little thing. As you get older, it trims the footage. Familiar paths, repeated actions, blurred transitions. You don't remember commuting, you just arrive. It's as if your brain quietly decides, we've done this scene, no need to film it again. But memory isn't just a function of what's happening, it also shapes what has happened, or what we think did. Ever misremember a conversation, swear someone said something they didn't, or remember something you're absolutely sure of, only to learn it never happened at all? This isn't carelessness, it's construction. Every time you recall a memory, your brain doesn't just retrieve it, it rebuilds it. Like opening a document, editing it slightly and hitting save. Over time, the memory changes, moulded by what you've learned since, how you feel now, or what someone else told you. Memories are less like paintings in a gallery and more like sand sculptures, shaped by your present perspective and eroded gently by time. Which brings us to a curious paradox. Memory is deeply personal, but not always privately made. Your memories are shaped by the stories you hear, the photos you see, the way others retell events. Family gatherings often involve shared remembering, but not always shared accuracy. That's not how it happened, someone will say. You're remembering it wrong. But who decides what's right? The version with the most votes? The one in the photo album? Maybe memory isn't about what happened. Maybe it's about the meaning we made from it. And then there are memories we can't recall, like the countless hours you spent learning to walk, to speak, to hold a spoon. You don't remember learning to be you, but those memories are there, stored somewhere beneath the surface, in muscle, in habit, in instinct. Procedural memory, they call it, the kind you don't think about. Like riding a bike, or tying a shoe, the kind that returns even after years of neglect, as if your body remembered while your mind was away. And yet, memory can also be cruelly fragile. A loved one with dementia may forget your name, but still hum a tune from their wedding day. Their timeline fractured, yet some melodies remain. Or perhaps they can't remember this morning's breakfast, but recall their childhood in vivid cinematic detail. Why? Because memory is layered. Some layers last longer than others. There's short-term memory, a delicate shelf that holds thoughts for mere seconds. The phone number you repeat to yourself on the way to write it down, the items you meant to grab from the grocery aisle, until one distraction sweeps them all away. And then there's long-term memory, a deeper vault, where ideas, images and identities live. It's not just a question of time, but of transfer. What makes one memory stay while another fades? Emotion, repetition, relevance. Science is still sorting that out. But for now, what matters is this. Memory is not simply a record of the past. It's a force that shapes the present. How we feel, what we do, who we believe we are. To lose memory is to lose part of the map. To remember is to carry a compass. And yet, sometimes, forgetting is a kind of gift too. We forget pain just enough to heal. We forget embarrassment just enough to try again. We forget details of grief just enough to laugh at a memory that once broke our heart. In this way, forgetting is not failure. It's grace. A way our minds make room. So here we are, in this soft hour between remembering and rest, wondering how it all works. What neurons fire? What circuits hold our secrets? What chemical ballet lets you recognize a face, recall a smell, or remember the sound of someone's voice. Memory feels so ordinary until you try to explain it, and that perhaps is where the mystery begins. Long before we had brain scans or the language of neurons, long before psychology textbooks and laboratory rats, humans knew something extraordinary was happening in the quiet theatre of the mind. We didn't call it memory, we called it something far more poetic, a spirit, a breath, a soul's ability to hold time. In ancient Greece, memory wasn't just a function, it was a goddess, Mnemosyne, mother of the muses, the divine wellspring of all poetry, history and song. If you wanted to create, to speak truth, to remember anything with weight or wisdom, you had to call on her. She was more than recollection. She was remembrance as a sacred act, memory as legacy, as identity. Even the very word mnemonic, those clever tricks we use to memorize things, it comes from her. But not all ancient cultures saw memory as divine. Some saw it as dangerous. In certain strands of Hindu and Buddhist thought, the goal wasn't to remember, but to transcend memory, to escape the cycle of rebirth and illusion, which was perpetuated by memory's grip, to forget the self, to forget desire, to reach something deeper, cleaner, quieter. And yet, in other parts of the world, memory was the foundation of everything. Long before written language, knowledge travelled mouth to mouth, generation to generation. In Aboriginal Australia, memory was not just oral, it was geographic. Sacred stories were woven into the land itself. These songlines were maps sung aloud, carrying not only directions across the vast desert, but ancestral wisdom, survival techniques, origin myths, all stored in melody, movement and place. Memory was not in the mind, it was underfoot. In West Africa, griots served as living libraries, storytellers, historians, musicians. Their minds carried entire genealogies, epics, songs of sorrow and praise. In societies without scrolls or screens, memory was history. It was power. It was protection. And even today, cultural memory shapes far more than we might notice. In Japan, the concept of mono-no aware, a sensitivity to the ephemeral, is deeply tied to memory. A cherry blossom's fall is precious because it won't last. The moment is held more tightly precisely because it's slipping away. And in that holding, memory is born. Some cultures mourn differently because of how they remember. In Mexico, Dia de los Muertos is not a solemn funeral but a joyful reunion. Memory becomes celebration, a shared table with those who have passed. You don't just grieve the dead, you invite them home, with sugar skulls and favourite songs. Meanwhile, in parts of Europe, memorials are carved in stone. Silence is reverence. Memory is stillness. Absence, honoured. So many ways to carry the past. Even language itself betrays how memory lives inside culture. In English we make memories like photographs, deliberate, curated, posed. But in some indigenous languages, memory isn't a thing you store. It's a path you walk. You don't recall, you return. And then there's the curious case of idioms. An elephant never forgets. Jog your memory. It's on the tip of my tongue, burned into my brain. We talk about memory like it's a landscape, a muscle, a fire, a trickster. All metaphors for something we still don't fully understand. Even religion has its stake in memory. The Hebrew Bible is filled with calls to remember. Remember the Sabbath. Remember that you were once strangers. Memory becomes morality, a way of grounding ethics and empathy. In Christianity, the Last Supper is remembered through ritual, not just as history, but as presence. Do this in remembrance of me. In this way, memory becomes something sacred, not passive, but participatory. Even in grief, we use memory as anchor. Funerals aren't just for saying goodbye, they're for remembering. Crafting the story will carry forward. Because as long as someone remembers, someone lives, at least a little. And then, of course, came the written word, the first memory prosthetic. Clay tablets, scrolls, stone, ink. Suddenly, remembering didn't have to live inside a single mind. It could be externalized, shared, preserved. But something shifted too. Socrates, that famously wise conversationalist of ancient Athens, actually warned against writing. He believed it would weaken memory. If people could rely on words preserved outside themselves, they might stop developing the deep internal faculties for holding knowledge. The sort of ancient don't Google or remember it. He wasn't entirely wrong. With every new invention, the printing press, the photograph, the voice memo, we gained convenience, and perhaps lost something too. Think about phone numbers. How many can you remember now? Or birthdays, appointments, even grocery lists? In a sense, we're offloading our memory onto machines. We live with tiny external brains, devices that remember for us. Calendars, notifications, history tabs, autocomplete. We're building a collective memory, yes. But what happens to the quiet practice of remembering when so much is just one search away? And yet, we adapt. Because human memory has always evolved alongside its environment. Storytelling became ritual. Ritual became writing. Writing became data. And still, we remember. Differently, maybe, but not less. Memory lives in the architecture of culture, in the shape of a song, the rhythm of a poem, the familiarity of a family recipe. It lives in lullabies and lull moments, in gestures passed down, phrases repeated, photos framed. Even in forgetting, we reveal how memory shapes us. A culture forgets its past and its identity shifts. A person forgets their childhood and something in their eyes becomes quieter. And yet, memory resurfaces, sometimes in dreams, sometimes in déjà vu, sometimes in the pause between two sentences. Because memory isn't just something we keep, it's something that keeps us. So while science may explain how memories form, with synapses and signals and chemical tags, humans have always known that remembering is more than recall. It's presence, it's legacy, it's love, held softly in the folds of thought. And somewhere, across time and oceans and languages, one thing remains true. To be remembered is to matter, and to remember, truly, gently, with intention, is to offer something timeless. So what is memory, really? Not as poetry, not as myth, but as biology, as function. What's actually happening inside your brain when a moment becomes a memory? At its core, memory is not a single thing. It's not a button you press or a file you save. It's a process, intricate, dynamic, astonishingly fragile, and more like a living ecosystem than a static archive. Scientists often break it into three essential stages: encoding, storage, and retrieval. Encoding is the part where your brain takes in information, like your eyes watching a falling leaf, or your ears catching the sound of someone's voice. It's the translation moment. Your senses receive raw input, and your brain begins the work of transforming that input into something it can hold on to. This is where attention becomes crucial. If you're distracted, multitasking, or sleep-deprived, that moment may pass through you like water through a sieve. The leaf falls, but it never becomes memory. You saw it maybe, but your brain didn't keep it. But if you're present, really there, your brain might take that moment and mark it. It might say, "Ah, that matters, let's save that one." And so it begins to store it. But again, storage isn't like shelving a book, it's more like creating a network, a pattern of connections across many regions of the brain. Some memories live close to language, others near smell or sound or space. The brain doesn't keep things in neat drawers, it weaves them into webs. The hippocampus, a seahorse-shaped structure tucked deep inside your brain, plays a vital role here. It's like the air traffic controller of memory, helping organise and stabilise new information so that it can eventually be integrated into long-term storage. Without the hippocampus, you might still remember your childhood, but you wouldn't remember what you had for breakfast. or who you just met, or what you were doing 5 minutes ago. This was the case with a man named Henry Molaison, known in neuroscience as HM. After a surgery to treat severe epilepsy damaged his hippocampus, he became unable to form new long-term memories. He could carry on a conversation, but forget it happened moments later. His world became a continuous now, and yet he could still learn certain motor skills. He could get better at a task, even if he didn't remember practicing it, which tells us that memory doesn't live in just one place. There are types, layers, different kinds of remembering. So what are those kinds? Scientists often divide memory into two broad categories: declarative and non-declarative. Declarative memory is the stuff you can consciously recall. Facts, events, the capital of France, what you ate for dinner last night, the name of your third-grade teacher. It's subdivided into two more types: episodic memory, which holds your life's personal events, your experiences; semantic memory, which stores general knowledge, things you've learned but may not remember learning. Then there's non-declarative memory, the unconscious kind. This includes procedural memory, like riding a bike, typing, playing an instrument. Skills stored so deep you don't need to think to use them. Priming, where exposure to one thing influences your response to another. Conditioning, like the classic Pavlov's dog experiments, where repeated associations create automatic responses. All of this lives in the brain, but not all in one neighbourhood. Memory is distributed. Visual memories involve the visual cortex. Emotional ones, especially fear, get routed through the amygdala. Movement and habit, the basal ganglia. Spatial memory, like how to navigate a familiar city, relies on the entorhinal cortex. It's less like a library, more like a city, with memories moving between districts, sometimes bumping into traffic, sometimes getting lost entirely. But not all memories are treated equally. Some memories fade in hours. Others, like the moment you heard devastating news or watched something sublime, stay vivid for life. These are often called flashbulb memories, so named because they feel like mental photographs, bright, sharp, etched in clarity. But even these are not immune to distortion. Over time, details shift. What felt accurate becomes approximate. Because again, memory is reconstructive. Your brain doesn't replay a scene. It reassembles it, like a jigsaw puzzle pulling pieces from different boxes. Sometimes it guesses, sometimes it fills in blanks, sometimes it lies, but gently, not maliciously, just humanly. To understand why memory is so fallible, and yet so essential, we have to talk about one of the brain's most magical traits: neuroplasticity. Neuroplasticity is your brain's ability to change, to adapt, rewire, grow. For a long time, scientists believed that the adult brain was fixed, hardwired, like a machine. But we now know the truth is far more hopeful. The brain is always changing, and memory is both a cause and a consequence of that change. Every time you learn something new, a word, a melody, a dance step, your brain physically changes. New connections form between neurons, pathways strengthen, circuits light up in new patterns. It's like carving trails in a forest. The more you walk a path, the clearer it becomes. This is how memories become more stable with repetition. It's not just practice, it's physical reinforcement. Proteins get synthesized, synapses grow stronger, brain cells, like old friends, become more likely to call each other when activated. But plasticity is a double-edged sword. Just as we can strengthen memories through use, we can weaken them through neglect. That's why skills fade. That's why languages rust. The trail in the forest grows over leaf by leaf, and there's another layer, emotional relevance. We're far more likely to remember something if it matters to us. If it triggers fear, joy, surprise, awe. Emotion acts like a highlighter in the brain. marking experiences as worthy of attention. This is largely thanks to the amygdala, which works closely with the hippocampus during memory formation. When you're emotionally aroused, say during a stressful event, the amygdala flags that moment as significant. It whispers to the hippocampus, "Hey, don't lose this." That's why traumatic memories can be so persistent, why they sometimes return without invitation, why something as small as a smell or a sound can open the floodgates. But neuroplasticity offers hope too, because just as painful memories can become entrenched, new experiences, especially those that are healing, repetitive, or reflective, can change how we relate to them. This is the foundation of therapies that help people reprocess trauma. It's also the reason mindfulness, journaling, and guided reflection can be so powerful. When you engage with your memory changes. Not the facts necessarily, but the feelings, the meaning, the narrative you attach. Memory is malleable, not just in the moment it's made, but in every moment it's remembered. And here's something even more curious. Sometimes we form memories that aren't ours at all. In psychological studies, participants have been led to believe they experienced things that never happened. A trip they didn't take, a balloon ride that never occurred. With just a few suggestions and doctored images, their brains filled in the blanks. Not because they wanted to lie, but because they believed it. Memory is powerful, but not perfect. And maybe that's the point. If it were flawless, it would be static. Instead, it's alive, evolving, reflecting not just what happened, but who we are when we remember it. There's even a name for this phenomenon: memory reconsolidation. The idea that each time we recall something, we're opening the file and rewriting it before we close it again. That's why memories change with time. That's why two people remember the same event so differently. Each memory is filtered through experience, emotion, attention, and identity. It's why you remember heartbreak differently now than when it happened. It's why some stories get softer with age, and some sharper. And it's why memory is not just an act of looking backward. It's a tool for imagining forward. Because the same regions of the brain involved in remembering the past, the hippocampus, the medial prefrontal cortex, parts of the parietal lobe, are also involved in envisioning the future. To recall and to imagine are, in a sense, the same gesture. Which brings us to a rather beautiful truth. Memory isn't about the past, it's about continuity. It's how we keep our thread, how we make sense of where we've been, how we begin to understand where we're going. So the next time a memory surprises you, comes rushing in out of nowhere, or hides just out of reach, maybe pause for a moment. It's not just a mental hiccup, it's your brain, alive with story, rewriting, reweaving, becoming. Let's linger here a little longer, now that we've touched how memory is formed, through networks, synapses, hippocampi, and emotional alchemy. Let's open the door just a little wider, because memory is not a closed book, it's a living system, and within that system are layers we're still discovering. Let's begin with short-term memory, a kind of mental chalkboard, fragile, temporary, easily wiped clean. Short-term memory lets you remember the beginning of this sentence by the time you reach the end. It holds the number you just read, the name you just heard, the question someone just asked. But only for a few seconds, maybe a minute if you're lucky, or focused. Psychologists used to think the limit was 7 items, give or take 2. 7 digits, 7 letters, 7 faces in a crowd. But recent studies suggest it might be closer to 4. 4 slots, like fragile teacups on a tray. Try to carry more, and one slips. But memory has tricks. You can chunk information. That's why phone numbers are broken into little bytes. 415 8067 5309 is easier to remember than a long stream of digits. Your brain groups. Patterns help. Rhythm helps. Association helps. And repetition, sweet, steady repetition, is the bridge between short-term and long-term memory. Every time you repeat something, a name, a fact, a movement, You signal the brain that it matters, that it's worth keeping, worth moving deeper into storage, and that deeper space is long-term memory. Not infinite, but vast. Not perfectly organised, but surprisingly efficient. Long-term memory isn't just one place. It's more like a shifting terrain. Hills and valleys, pathways that brighten with use, or fade with disuse. Some memories settle easily. Others require more care. Sleep plays a vital role here. While you rest, your brain doesn't. It reviews the day. It sifts through experiences, decides what to keep, what to trim, what to refile. It strengthens some connections, weakens others. This is especially true during deep sleep and REM sleep. Those mysterious dreaming states when your eyes flutter beneath closed lids and your brain hums with activity. This is why pulling an all-nighter before an exam may actually hurt more than help. Without sleep, those facts might never cross the bridge into long-term memory. They simply vanish into the fog of fatigue. Sleep doesn't just restore the body, it tends the garden of memory. But what happens when the system falters? Memory disorders offer a window into what memory is, by showing us what happens when it's broken. There's anterograde amnesia, the inability to form new memories. You remember who you are, where you've been, but the present slips through your fingers like water. Each day begins again, and there's retrograde amnesia. The loss of memories from before an injury or trauma, a blurring of the past, the anchors loosen. Your own story becomes a half-read book, pages missing. And then there's Alzheimer's disease, a condition that slowly unravels memory from both ends. It begins subtly, a lost word, a misplaced key, but over time it carves away names, places, faces, even the self. It's not just forgetting, it's vanishing. The brain changes, plaques form, connections fray. The hippocampus, once a bustling hub of memory-making, begins to shrink, and yet, even in late stages, music often remains. A song can stir something that spoken words no longer reach. Rhythm and melody sometimes remain when everything else recedes. Perhaps because music lives across so many brain regions, it's harder to lose all at once. These conditions remind us that memory is physical. It lives in the cells and structures of the brain, and when those structures are damaged, memory suffers. But there's another kind of memory change, one not caused by trauma or disease. Manipulated memory. It sounds like science fiction, but it's science fact. Our memories can be edited, not by machines or hypnotists in swirling coats, though Hollywood loves that idea, but by us, by our brains, by how we remember. Earlier, we mentioned reconsolidation, the process by which a memory is reopened and restored each time it's recalled. This moment of openness means the memory is vulnerable, like a clay sculpture softened with water. You can reshape it, for better or worse. This can happen naturally, through emotion, new context, suggestion. But researchers are also studying how this might be harnessed. For instance, someone with PTSD might vividly recall a traumatic event. By recalling that memory in a safe, controlled environment and introducing new, non-threatening information, the brain may begin to update the memory, so it becomes less distressing, less paralysing. The emotion tied to the memory changes, even if the memory itself remains. This is a radical shift in how we think about memory. It's not frozen, it's editable, flexible, alive. But such plasticity also opens the door to false memories. In one famous study, researchers convinced participants they'd been lost in a mall as a child, a memory that had never happened. With just a few gentle suggestions and imagined details, participants began to believe the event was real. They could describe it, picture it, feel it, not because they were lying, because the memory had become theirs. Our brains are storytellers, and sometimes they prefer coherence over accuracy. We fill in blanks, smooth rough edges, borrow from dreams, books, photographs, overheard stories. Sometimes the best stories aren't true. Sometimes the worst ones aren't either. And that's where memory becomes powerful. not just in what it helps us remember, but in what we believe. So what does this mean for who we are? It means our identities, our sense of self, are shaped not only by what we've experienced, but by what we've remembered and what we've forgotten, and sometimes by what never happened at all. That may sound unsettling, but it's also liberating. If memory can change, then healing is possible. If memories are shaped by meaning, then we can shape the meaning they carry. In therapy, in art, in reflection, we retell our own stories. Sometimes not to change the facts, but to find new ways of seeing them. A heartbreak becomes a lesson. A failure becomes a turning point. A memory once steeped in shame becomes laced with compassion. This is the human gift. We don't just store memories, we live them again and again in slightly new light. And memory keeps surprising us, even at its limits. Have you ever experienced déjà vu? That eerie sense that you've been here before? That the moment you're living now has already happened? No one knows exactly why this occurs. One theory is that your brain briefly misfires. It routes a new experience through the circuits usually reserved for old memories. So your brain mistakes the new for familiar. You haven't lived it before, it just feels like you have. There's also jamais vu, the opposite. When something familiar suddenly feels strange, you look at a word you've written 1,000 times, and it looks wrong, foreign, empty of meaning. These glitches remind us that memory isn't perfect. It's a fluid system, always recalibrating. And then there are savant memories, rare individuals with astonishing recall. Some can recite entire books from memory, remember every day of their lives in perfect sequence, or instantly calculate complex math problems. These cases challenge our assumptions about the limits of memory. They suggest that our brains may store far more than we can access. That forgetting is not always loss, sometimes it's protection. Because to remember everything would be overwhelming. Our minds forget not just because they fail, but because they choose to. They prioritize, they curate, they let go, to make space. Still, science is always reaching further. Today, researchers are exploring memory prosthetics, brain implants that may one day help restore memory in people with neurological damage. Tiny devices that mimic the firing patterns of the hippocampus, designed to reinforce or replace failing circuits. It's early, experimental, controversial. But it points to a future where memory might not be something we just have, but something we engineer. And with that future comes questions. If we can alter memory, what is truth? If we can delete pain, do we lose the lesson? If we can enhance recall, do we risk overwhelm? Memory manipulation in fiction, and maybe someday in fact, raises deeply human dilemmas. Would you erase a painful breakup, a childhood hurt, an awkward moment you still cringe about? Would you relive your best day again and again, knowing it might lose its meaning? Would you download a stranger's memories to understand them better? Or perhaps just to feel something you never lived? These aren't just philosophical questions, they're technological ones. Neuroscience is approaching a crossroads, and memory, soft, unreliable, emotional memory, is at its centre. But for now, most of us live with our natural minds. Forgetful, surprising, beautifully inconsistent. And maybe that's enough, because memory doesn't need to be perfect to be profound. It's not a mirror of the past, it's a mosaic, sometimes missing pieces, sometimes rearranged, but always uniquely yours. Even now, as you lie here listening, the words you remember will become your version of this moment. They'll mix with your thoughts, your memories, your dreams. And that's what makes memory so strange, so human. It's not a thing we keep in our brain. It's a place we go, a room we decorate with meaning, a voice that says, "This mattered," and then lets us decide what comes next. Memory, for most of human history, was a mystery wrapped in metaphor. Before brain scans or experiments, Before the language of neurotransmitters and circuits, we explained memory the way we explained weather or dreams, through story, symbol, and sometimes song. The earliest theories of memory weren't scientific but philosophical, thoughtful guesses, woven from observation and imagination. What else could they be in an age before microscopes or magnets? In ancient Egypt, memory was thought to live in the heart. The ib, a spiritual organ weighed in the afterlife to judge the soul's worth. The brain, that was scooped out during mummification. Unimportant, they believed, silent, empty of spirit. And yet, even then, memory was revered. It was how wisdom passed from one life to the next, how stories travelled, how the names of ancestors survived the dust. In Greece, the philosophers began to wonder more directly. Plato imagined memory as a wax tablet, experiences pressed into it like a signet ring into warm wax, some deeply etched, others easily smudged. Memory, in his view, was not learning something new, but recalling knowledge the soul had always possessed. A remembrance of forms, truths half forgotten by incarnation. Aristotle, more grounded, saw memory as an association, a chain of causes and effects, where one thought led to another, the smell of rain to a childhood walk, the sound of bells to a schoolyard morning. He wasn't entirely wrong. We still understand memory as associative, context-sensitive, tethered to sensation and sequence. The Roman thinker Cicero offered another metaphor. Memory as a treasury, a mental vault where facts could be stored and summoned by will. And later, the Stoics encouraged mental discipline as a way to retain knowledge, repetition, reflection, visualization. But it wasn't until the rise of rhetoric, the ancient art of persuasion, that memory took centre stage in education. In Rome, in Greece, in medieval monasteries, students were trained in the art of memory. They learned to build mental palaces, vast imagined buildings populated with vivid, absurd, unforgettable images. A cow reading a book in the foyer, a fountain of ink in the hallway, each image tied to a concept, each room a speech, a sequence, a chapter. These memory palaces weren't just party tricks. They were tools, ways of encoding information into visual space, emotion, and story. The more strange or emotional the image, the more durable the memory. Even today, memory athletes use similar techniques, imagining landscapes filled with impossible objects, organising shopping lists and digits into castles and gardens and train stations. Then came the printing press, and with it, a subtle shift. As external memory became more accessible, in books, in libraries, in ledgers, the burden on internal memory lessened. You didn't need to memorize an entire epic poem. You could look it up. Knowledge was now external, portable, permanent. But some mourned the loss. They feared memory might weaken, that people would remember how to find things but not the things themselves. A worry that echoes even now in the age of search engines. Still, the idea of memory as a skill, something one could improve, remained. And for centuries memory was more art than science, a thing you trained, a virtue you cultivated, a faculty of the soul. It wasn't until the 19th century that memory began to be studied as a biological process. One of the earliest pioneers was Hermann Ebbinghaus, a German psychologist who, in the 1880s, performed painstaking experiments on himself. He created long lists of nonsense syllables and memorized them, testing how much he retained after minutes, hours, days. Through this, he mapped the now famous forgetting curve, the observation that we forget most things rapidly unless we review them. He also discovered the spacing effect, the idea that memory improves when learning is spread out over time, rather than crammed into a single session, and the serial position effect, our tendency to remember the first and last items in a list better than those in the middle. Ebbinghaus's work was foundational. He took memory out of the realm of metaphor and gave it numbers, curves, graphs, repeatable methods. But still, memory remained for the most part mysterious. Then came the 20th century, and with it, a revolution. In the early 1900s, the field of neurology was growing rapidly. Doctors began studying patients with brain injuries, people who'd lost memories or couldn't form new ones. Each case offered a clue, a breadcrumb. In 1953, a man named Henry Molaison underwent surgery to treat epilepsy. His hippocampus was removed, and with it his ability to form new long-term memories. He could still remember his childhood. He could carry on a conversation. But 5 minutes later, it was gone. And yet, astonishingly, he could learn new motor skills, tasks like drawing a shape in a mirror, even though he didn't remember practicing them. This suggested that different types of memory lived in different parts of the brain, that remembering how to do something, procedural memory, was separate from remembering that you had done it, episodic memory. Henry, known to science as HM, became one of the most studied patients in the history of neuroscience. His life reshaped our understanding of memory, and after his death his brain was preserved, sliced and mapped, not out of morbid curiosity, but reverent gratitude. He gave us a map we didn't know we needed. Throughout the mid-century, cognitive psychologists began charting memory's architecture. The Atkinson-Shiffrin model, proposed in 1968, described memory as a system with 3 parts: sensory memory, short-term memory, and long-term memory. It offered a framework, a flowchart of how experiences moved through our minds. Then came the development of computers. Suddenly memory had a new metaphor: the machine, input, storage, output. Memory became data. The brain became hardware. Learning became programming. The analogy was imperfect, elegant but cold. Still, it helped scientists model processes, run simulations, understand how information might be encoded, retrieved, forgotten. And then, in the late 20th century, something extraordinary happened. We began to watch the brain in real time. With the advent of imaging technologies, PET scans, fMRIs, EEGs, researchers could see which parts of the brain lit up during memory tasks. They could watch the hippocampus glow when a person recalled a childhood event. They could track how trauma activated the amygdala. They could measure blood flow, track electrical pulses, observe the ghostly dance of thought. Memory was no longer invisible. It had form, colour, rhythm. This ushered in the age of neuroscience. Researchers identified neurotransmitters involved in memory, like glutamate, a key player in synaptic plasticity. They discovered long-term potentiation, a cellular process where repeated stimulation strengthens the connection between neurons. Neurons that fire together, wire together, the saying goes. Memory, it turns out, is a conversation between cells, and every time we remember something, we help those cells talk a little louder, a little faster, a little more fluently. And yet, even with all this technology, all these insights, the mystery remains. We still don't fully understand how a network of cells produces the richness of a remembered kiss, or the way grief comes back in a song, or how a scent can open a window into a decade you thought you'd left behind. But science keeps moving. In recent years, we've seen breakthroughs in artificial intelligence and machine learning, technologies inspired, in part, by the architecture of memory. Neural networks, modelled loosely on the brain, can now learn patterns, recognise faces, even write stories. Some researchers are exploring memory implants, devices that mimic hippocampal activity and may one day help restore lost memories. Others are studying optogenetics, using light to activate specific neurons, potentially turning memories on or off. We're no longer just observing memory, we're beginning to manipulate it, which raises profound questions. If we can edit memories, should we? If we can erase pain, what do we lose? If we can implant knowledge, what becomes of learning? Science fiction has wrestled with these questions for decades. in films, novels, dystopias. But the future is no longer fiction. It's approaching, slowly, steadily, neuron by neuron. And yet, through all this evolution, from wax tablets to synaptic models, from oral tradition to digital prosthetics, one truth persists. Memory is not just a process, it's a presence. It is how we carry the past, how we imagine the future, how we locate ourselves in time and space and story, and every scientific breakthrough only deepens the wonder. Because even when we can explain the chemicals, the circuits, the cellular ballet, there is still something breathtaking about the fact that a kiss, a scent, a song, a sentence can live inside us for a lifetime. Somewhere, deep in the dark cathedral of the mind, the past still echoes, and to remember it, for even a moment, is to be human. What is a memory, really? Not just in the neural sense, not the circuits or the chemicals or the elegant maps that glow under machines, but at the level of self, of being, of soul, if that word still whispers to you. Because when we remember, something happens that science alone hasn't quite captured. We return, not metaphorically, not theatrically, but quietly, unmistakably. One moment we're here, fingers tapping, breath moving, the steady weight of now, and the next we're there. A park bench, a bedroom ceiling, a meal, half finished under summer light. The mind steps through an invisible door, the body stays, the heart stirs, and just like that, time folds. Not backward, or forward, but inward. It's easy to think of memory as a function, an ability, like math or balance or language. But the more you sit with it, the more slippery it becomes, the more alive. Because memory is not passive. It's not a photograph you pull from a drawer. It's not a static object collecting dust on a mental shelf. Memory moves, it mutates, it reassembles itself depending on who we are the moment we recall it. You don't remember your childhood the same way you did 5 years ago. You remember it through a new lens, coloured by what's happened since, softened or sharpened, corrected or romanticised. In that way, memory is not just a way of preserving the past, it's a way of retelling it. And that means, unsettlingly, beautifully, that memory isn't fixed. It's rewritten every time we revisit it. We imagine memory as something stored and retrieved like files on a computer. But your brain doesn't play back a memory. It reconstructs it, piece by piece, from fragments and feelings, from smell and rhythm, from expectation. So, what if our memories aren't what happened? What if they're what we need to have happened? What if they're a form of storytelling, not dishonest, but emotional? What if remembering is a creative act? And what if forgetting is too? If so, then maybe memory is not a vault but a canvas, and every act of recall is a brushstroke. The philosopher John Locke once said that memory was the very root of identity, that the continuity of the self depended not on the body, or even the soul, but on the awareness of being the same person across time. That if we could remember our past experiences, we were still us. But if we couldn't, were we? What are we without memory? Without the tether of yesterday? We see the answer, in part, in those who lose memory slowly, in Alzheimer's, in dementia, the unravelling, not of facts but of self, the forgetting of names, of habits, of once automatic phrases, and yet, even then, something persists. A laugh, a hum, the instinct to hold a hand. Love, somehow, lingers even when names do not. So maybe the self isn't just memory. Maybe it's feeling, recognition without words, a soul-shaped resonance. Or maybe, more radically, the self is always a fiction, a narrative the brain tells to make sense of continuity. A me built out of memories that were never quite accurate to begin with. You believe you were the same person at 7, at 17, at 37. But were you? Your cells are different. Your priorities, your loves, your fears, and yet you still say I. So perhaps memory doesn't just preserve self, it creates it. You are the story you remember, and that story shifts. Here's another quiet truth. Memory doesn't live in the past, it lives in the present. It happens now, inside you, each time it's called, which makes it real, even if the past it refers to is gone or never was. Even if your memory is incomplete, or flawed, or softened by the kindness of distance, it's still yours. That matters. Memory is how we locate ourselves in time. It's the scaffolding of identity, the shape of decision, the blueprint of longing. And maybe that's why some memories refuse to leave, not because they're important to history, but because they're important to you. The time someone waited for you in the rain, the voice that said, I see you. The moment you realised you weren't alone. It doesn't matter if anyone else remembers. It's stitched into your consciousness, and that stitching, delicate, invisible, alive, is how you became who you are. Some thinkers believe memory is more than internal, that it's embedded in the body, in the breath, in the way your muscles know how to move, even when your mind forgets. Others go further still. Carl Jung imagined a collective unconscious, a vast shared memory beneath the surface of all minds. Myths, archetypes, patterns older than language. What if some of what you remember isn't yours? Or what if all memory is communal? A thought passed hand to hand across generations, a gesture that began before you, a dream you inherited. Could memory live in blood, in bone, in something we don't yet have a name for? Across cultures, memory is often seen as sacred, not just practical but spiritual. In some traditions, ancestors are remembered through ritual, not to keep history alive but to keep the relationship present, to say they still exist because we still remember. In others, memory is something to let go of. In certain strands of Buddhist thought, liberation comes when you release your attachments, your identity, your ego, your memories, to forget the self in order to find something deeper. So, is memory what keeps us human, or what keeps us bound? Both, maybe. Maybe memory is both blessing and burden, a light we carry and a weight. It lets us love with depth and grieve with sharpness. It lets us learn, and sometimes it lets us hurt. Some people remember too much. Hypothymesia, a condition where individuals recall almost every day of their lives with astonishing detail. Sounds like a gift, until you realise how painful it is to never forget a single slight, a single mistake, a single sorrow. Others live in the fog of forgetting. Alzheimer's, trauma, brain injury. They lose names, places, years, and still something human shines through. So maybe memory is not a test. Maybe it's not about perfect recall. Maybe it's about meaning. We remember what matters to us. Sometimes we wish we could forget. Sometimes we can't remember what we wish we could. And sometimes, just sometimes, memory arrives like grace. Unexpected, unannounced. A scent in the air, a fragment of a song, a sudden softness in the heart, and we pause and we say, yes, that, and we are home. Memory may not be reliable, but it is real, not in the sense of accuracy, but in the sense of truth. And perhaps that's the most human thing of all, to remember something the way we needed it to be, to hold it, to carry it, to let it shape who we are, even if no one else can see it, even if no one else was there. And then there's the mystery of déjà vu, the strange flicker of familiarity in a place you've never been, a conversation you've never had, but swear you have. Science explains it, loosely, as a glitch, a lag between perception and awareness. The brain momentarily misfires. You feel as if something just experienced has already been lived. But what if it's more? What if it's a memory from a parallel life, a fragment from a dream, a moment already written? You can't prove it, but you feel it. And feeling in memory is half the truth. More than half. Some people say memories are like ghosts, echoes of people and places that no longer exist. But maybe that's backwards. Maybe we are the ghosts, passing through our own past, visiting old versions of ourselves, whispering to the person we used to be, hoping they'll listen. Sometimes they do. Sometimes we change. Now. Because we remember then differently. And maybe that's the point. Not to recall the past, but to relate to it, to learn from it, to soften it, to forgive it, to weave it into something new. So what if memory is not about holding on? What if it's about letting go, gently, lovingly, with awareness, and keeping only what keeps us kind? You can't remember everything. You're not supposed to. But you can remember enough. Enough to say this mattered. Enough to say I've been shaped by love. Enough to say I've lived. And as you lie here now, perhaps drifting, perhaps thinking of a scent from long ago, or a song you haven't heard in years, know this. Your memories are not mistakes. They are not broken archives. They are stars in a night sky you carry behind your eyes. Some shine bright, some flicker faint, but they are yours, and no one else sees them exactly the way you do. No one else feels them that way. So maybe memory is not just how we navigate the past. Maybe it's how we honour it. Maybe it's how we whisper to the future softly. I was here. I felt this. I still do. And maybe that's enough. Memory doesn't usually arrive like thunder. Not in real life. It's quieter than that. It slips in while you're brushing your teeth, while you're stirring your coffee, while you stand in line at the post office and hear someone say a word that takes you somewhere else entirely. And suddenly you're not in the post office anymore. You're on your grandmother's porch, watching dust float through golden light. You're on a late-night train, forehead against cool glass, wondering about someone you haven't thought of in years. That's the shape of memory in everyday life. It doesn't ask permission. It doesn't explain itself. It just appears, fully formed or half-faded, and then disappears again, leaving only a hum in your chest where a moment used to be. And what's strange and so perfectly human is how easily we forget just how much memory is with us, constantly, silently doing the heavy lifting of being alive. It's there when you tie your shoes, when you crack an egg, when you reach for the same mug every morning because it just feels right in your hand. Muscle memory, habit, the choreography of the mundane. But even here, even in these background tasks, memory is at work, weaving continuity into a world that would otherwise be full of endless beginnings. You don't need to learn how to drive every morning. You don't need to relearn what your kitchen looks like, or which drawer holds the spoons. Memory remembers for you. It lets your life have rhythm. And sometimes, when things break that rhythm, when you move houses or someone you love is no longer sitting at the breakfast table, it's memory that lets the loss echo. You keep reaching for the old drawer. You keep setting 2 plates out of habit. This is memory in its quietest costume, muscle and instinct and ghost. But memory lives in louder places too. It lives in our language, in the phrases we use without thinking, in the idioms passed down. Elephant memory. Like riding a bike. That rings a bell. So many of these phrases suggest a kind of magic. Memory is something that clings, that sings, that returns, and we speak about it almost as if it were its own person. It came to me. It slipped my mind. I can't shake it. We don't say I remembered. We say the memory arrived, as though we are the receiver, not the keeper, as though memory chooses us, which some days it feels like it does. You smell cinnamon and remember a house you haven't been in for 20 years. You see someone's handwriting and your throat tightens, because suddenly it's them, right there, sitting next to you, if only for a breath. In daily life, memory hides in everything. In the sound of your footsteps, in your handwriting, in the lullabies you hum to your children without realizing they're the same ones sung to you. Even in silence, memory hums beneath. You notice it most often in contrast, when you forget. The name on the tip of your tongue, the why of your walk into a room, the shopping list that vanishes the moment you step into the store, and you laugh, or sigh, or make a joke about aging. But deep down, there's a flicker of something else, a tiny fear maybe, because we've been taught to equate memory with competence, with intelligence, with control. We fear it's fading. We fear what it means when the names begin to slip, when the dates grow hazy, when the timeline unravels just a little. But forgetting is part of remembering. It's not the enemy, it's the editor. Without forgetting, life would be overwhelming, a constant flood of details, unfiltered, unranked, all with equal urgency. We need forgetting. We need to forget some things in order to remember others more clearly. The mind, like a good writer, cuts what isn't essential. And what is essential? That's where memory becomes emotional. You don't always remember what someone said, but you remember how they looked at you. You don't remember the grade you got, but you remember how you felt holding the paper. You don't remember the details of the trip, but you remember the feeling of standing at the edge of the ocean, full of something too big to name. That's the paradox of memory in daily life. We forget what we tried to remember, and we remember what we tried to forget. And the moments that stay are rarely the ones we expected. We remember the ordinary, the spontaneous, the moments between moments. Not always the wedding, but the glance during the vows. Not the graduation speech, but the laughter walking back to the car. Memory favours meaning, not schedule. That's why rituals exist. We build memory into the structure of our days, not just for efficiency, but for continuity. Birthdays, holidays, anniversaries, photos on the fridge, stories at dinner. We repeat to remember. Even jokes and phrases become miniature monuments. Remember that time becomes an act of friendship, a way of keeping each other real. Families do this. Friends, lovers, cultures. Entire communities define themselves through shared memory. And this memory shows up in art, in paintings, in poetry, in lullabies. We write books about the past. We film our grandparents. We visit childhood homes just to stand in a doorway and feel something we can't put into words. In grief, we remember more sharply. We replay the last conversation, the last meal, the tone of their voice, the way they stood in a room. We worry we'll forget. We memorize their laugh, their handwriting, their cologne. And even when time takes the edges away, something stays. Grief is a form of memory, stretched wide and raw, and joy is too. So much of everyday joy is memory reawakened. You don't just taste ice cream. You remember the summer of your 10th birthday. You don't just sit in a cafe. You remember the trip where you first learned how to order coffee in another language. Even boredom has memory in it. You're bored because you've done this before. You know what's coming. You're repeating something remembered, not discovering something new. And the more we repeat, the more life becomes woven with familiarity. This is why time seems to speed up as we get older. When we're young, everything is new. The brain pays attention, it marks the experience, encodes it deeply. As adults, the days blur, routine takes over, the novelty fades, and so we forget. Not because we weren't present, but because there wasn't anything to mark. And that's where memory becomes an invitation. Not just to hold the past, but to notice the present. To ask, what will I remember from this day? And why? The truth is, we are making memories all the time. Every interaction, every word, every quiet choice. And even if we forget most of them, a few will stay. The ones that matter. The ones with feeling. The ones that change us. In this way, memory is not just private, it's relational. It's shaped by others, held by others. When someone remembers for you, your birthday, your story, your preferences, it feels like being seen, And when someone forgets your name, your face, your importance, it stings. Because memory is love in disguise. To remember someone is to say, you were worth storing, you mattered enough. So we build our lives around memory. We journal, we take photos, we keep souvenirs, not for their beauty, but for their feeling. A movie stub, a voicemail, a rock from a hike. Memory lives in objects, not because they hold meaning, but because we do. And when we grow old, or when our parents grow old, memory becomes something else again. A landscape with gentle fog, some paths clear, some overgrown. And still, moments break through. The name of a song, the taste of favourite soup, a line from a prayer learned long ago. Even as other memories fade, the oldest ones often stay, which tells us something profound, that memory isn't stored in size or strength, but in depth. The memories that go deepest last longest. So in daily life, it isn't about remembering more, it's about remembering what matters and letting the rest drift by like leaves on a quiet river. You'll forget most of this day, and that's okay. But something, maybe a sentence or a tone or a moment of stillness, might stay. It might return when you least expect it, as a whisper, as warmth, as a sudden sense of something known. And when it does, you'll smile. Not because you remembered on purpose, but because memory arrived like it always does, uninvited, unexplainable, and just in time. What if memories aren't in the brain? Not entirely, anyway. What if they're stored in time itself, woven through the fabric of the universe like subtle echoes, like grooves in a record, waiting to be replayed by anyone who walks the same path, at the right moment, in the right light? A smell in an empty room, a shadow that feels like it knows your name, a sudden certainty that you've been here before. Maybe those aren't tricks of the brain at all. Maybe they're moments the world remembers and whispers back. We talk about memory as if it's personal, private, confined inside the skull. But sometimes, doesn't it feel bigger than that? You hear a piano in a distant room, and it moves something ancient in you, something you didn't know you knew, a sadness, a sweetness, a presence. Or you stand in a forest and you feel not alone, not haunted, just remembered, as if the trees saw you before you were born. What if memory is not just a function of the mind, but a field, a resonance, a place you step into like light or weather? Some scientists, cautiously, quietly, have wondered about this, about the possibility of a kind of extracorporeal memory, a non-local record. Memory not just as neural activity, but as entanglement, as imprint, as energy lingering in space. It's unproven, it's strange, but so is déjà vu. That eerie feeling of having lived this exact moment before, not just in concept, but in texture, the scent, the mood, the turning of your head at just the right second. It's not vague, it's vivid, familiar in a way that defies explanation. Science tells us it's likely a delay in neural processing, that the brain perceives the same moment twice, milliseconds apart, that your sense of now stutters and you mistake it for memory. But what if that's only part of the story? What if déjà vu is a ripple, a bleed-through from a parallel life, you somewhere else, making a similar choice in a different branch of the universe? The many worlds interpretation of quantum mechanics suggests that every decision, every possibility splits reality, creating infinite versions of you, of me, of every bird, every falling leaf. And if that's true, what if memory sometimes leaps the gap? What if that flicker of familiarity is not a glitch, but a glimpse, a message from another you who made a different choice? What if that path you didn't take, the job you turned down, the love you let go, the door you walked past, still echoes in you because part of you is still living it elsewhere? That would make memory more than recollection. It would make it multidimensional, A bridge not just to the past but across timelines. Or here's another possibility. What if memory runs backward? Not metaphorically, not emotionally. What if, on some deep level, memory is time's reverse mirror? We only think we remember the past because it's behind us. But what if that's just perception? What if memory is how we feel the future coming? After all, the brain's predictive systems are astonishing. We constantly simulate what might happen, milliseconds ahead, years ahead. And those predictions shape what we perceive. Could it be that memory and foresight are the same thing? That we're not recalling the past, we're feeling the pattern? We've all had those moments. A dream that later unfolds in real life. A hunch that turns out to be right. An image in the mind's eye that appears days or weeks later in the waking world. Most people brush it off. Coincidence, pattern seeking, nothing more. But what if it isn't? What if memory and imagination are made of the same thread? They already light up the same brain regions, the hippocampus, the prefrontal cortex. When you remember and when you imagine, your mind draws from the same toolbox. Maybe there's no true difference. Maybe all memory is imagined, and all imagination is remembered. There's something quietly profound about that. That memory might not be a storage unit, but a creative act. Every time you remember something, you rebuild it. Not retrieve it. Rebuild it. Out of fragments, guesses, emotions. It's not a playback. It's a remix. And what if that's exactly what dreams are? Not nonsense, not static, but the brain's rehearsal room. A theatre where memory and fantasy blur. Where old feelings are tried on again. Where future situations are tested. Where your emotional self runs simulations through stories, masks, metaphors. It's why dreams often feel both surreal and deeply real, because they're made from memory's clay, reshaped by desire and fear. It's also why some people claim to have remembered dreams of events that haven't yet happened. Science doesn't quite know what to do with that, but many cultures do. In ancient traditions, across Greece, Egypt, China, and indigenous nations around the world, dreams were seen as messages from ancestors, from spirits, from the self, and memory was part of that language. If a dream felt familiar, it was familiar, even if it hadn't happened yet. Not because the future was seen, but because time was not linear. In those worldviews, memory isn't about what was, it's about what is, repeating, echoing, teaching. Some thinkers even ask, what if the universe itself has memory? Not metaphorically, literally. What if, like a particle, the universe remembers its previous state? And that's what gives rise to physical laws, order, consistency. The physicist Lee Smolin has proposed models where the laws of nature evolve, where memory of previous patterns creates stability, gravity, light, time, not constants but habits. That's a wild idea. The idea that even reality learns, not unlike the brain. And speaking of learning, what happens when we try to engineer memory? We already do in simple ways. Flashcards, mnemonics, repetition, training, sleep-enhanced learning. But what happens when we go further? We're now testing memory implants in mice. We're stimulating neural circuits to restore memory in patients with trauma. We're using optogenetics, light, to turn memories on and off in real time. In theory, we could one day download knowledge, upload skills, wipe out painful associations, inject false ones. Would we? Should we? In Total Recall, a man wakes up with an artificial past, and it becomes more real than anything he lived before. In Black Mirror, memories are stored and replayed on demand, until relationships collapse under the weight of scrutiny. In Blade Runner, replicants believe their memories are real, and therefore, so are they. Fiction keeps circling this idea. If your memories aren't real, are you? What makes a memory authentic? Is it the accuracy or the meaning? If you believe it happened, if it shaped how you live, Does it matter if it's factual? If your love, your sorrow, your courage were built on false memories, are they false feelings? That's the paradox. Memory is often inaccurate, but never irrelevant. It means something, even when it's wrong. And that brings us to something even stranger. What if memory can be shared? Not just through stories, but literally, through neural interfaces, through recording devices, through virtual experience. Scientists are already experimenting with brain-to-brain communication in animals, transmitting learned behaviours, mapping patterns. One day, you might be able to share a memory the way you share a photo. You wouldn't tell someone what you felt. They'd feel it, directly. The warmth of a sunrise on your 16th birthday. The way your father's voice cracked when he said goodbye. The terror of your first fall, the thrill of your first flight, transmitted perfectly into another mind. Would empathy grow? Or would boundaries blur? Would we lose something sacred? Would we become less alone? Or too exposed? It's hard to know, because memory as it stands now is private. Even when we share it, we filter it, we edit, we protect ourselves, we tell stories. But if memory becomes transmissible, if your raw, full experience could be felt by someone else, would that deepen love or destroy intimacy? Would we become more human or something else? Some suggest this is how collective consciousness begins. A web of minds, a shared archive. Not just Wikipedia, but Rememberpedia, a living memory of the species available to all. It sounds impossible, until you realise we already do this, imperfectly, through books, films, rituals, music. We hand each other memory in every story. We say, "This happened, I felt this, please carry it forward," and others do. In that way, memory is already shared, already immortal, already science fiction. So maybe the real what if isn't about the future of memory. Maybe it's about the present. What if this moment becomes a memory? Not tomorrow, but now. What if you're remembering it already or as you live it? The sound of this voice, the quiet of the room, the feel of your breath slow and steady, the knowing that somewhere someone else is listening too. What if memory isn't behind us at all? What if it's beside us? What if it's this? Maybe memory is not a thing we have, but a place we return to. Not a vault we keep locked in our minds, but a soft path that winds behind us. Always there, always fading, always waiting. And maybe the real act of remembering is simply noticing that we were here once, that we loved something, that we lost something, that something in us opened when it did. We've walked through many layers, together, from neurons to nostalgia, from synapses to stories, from the quick flicker of short-term memory to the deep drift of long-term recollection, from the hippocampus, carefully forming maps of our lives, to the amygdala, colouring those maps with feeling, with red for danger and gold for love. We've seen how repetition lays the groundwork, how emotion lays the anchor, how forgetting isn't failure but necessity, an editing process that leaves space for what matters most. We've traced memory in the brain, but we've also felt it in the chest, in that pang you can't quite name, in the way your breath catches at a song from 10 summers ago, in the small, sharp ache of a scent that calls someone back who isn't there anymore. Not really, not physically, but still, somehow, here. Because that's the thing about memory. It cheats time. You can close your eyes and be 6 years old again, or standing in the hallway of a house you haven't visited in 20 years, or feeling the exact shape of a heartbreak that once tore you open. And for that moment, you are there. Memory isn't past. Memory is presence, disguised. It's not what happened, it's what lives. In the stories we tell, in the objects we keep, in the silence between words when we're remembering something we don't quite want to say out loud, and it's not always accurate. But maybe that's not the point. Maybe memory's role isn't to keep a perfect record, but to keep us whole, to thread our present self to our past self with just enough stitching that we don't unravel. Even if the thread is a little frayed, even if the colours don't quite match anymore, memory keeps us tied to our becoming. Think about how much of who you are is memory, not just facts, but patterns, not just events, but meanings, your fears, your joys, your habits, your humour, all shaped by the moments that stuck, by the way someone looked at you once, by a praise you received, or didn't, by a door you walked through, or didn't. Memory is identity in motion. And like any motion, it changes as it moves. The memory you had last year is not quite the memory you have today. It bends, it softens, it colours in its own blanks. But somehow, it still feels true. And perhaps that's what makes memory such a quiet miracle. It's not the facts that stay, it's the truth. Or rather, your truth. Memory is personal, even when shared. Two people can walk through the same day and remember it in completely different ways. Because memory is not the event, it's the experience of the event, shaped by who we were, what we needed, what we feared, what we hoped. We remember what the moment meant, not just what happened, which is why some memories come back in dreams, abstract, surreal, rearranged, because meaning isn't always linear, and neither is memory. We circle back to old moments again and again, seeing them differently each time, like light reflecting on water, changing with every ripple, every cloud, every hour of the day. Sometimes we go looking for memories. We open journals. We scroll through photos. We visit places we haven't seen in years, hoping the walls still know our name. Other times, memory finds us, when we least expect it, in a laugh, in a flavour, in the sudden quiet of an evening. And for a second, it's not nostalgia. It's not longing. It's simply arrival. You are with that moment again, and it is with you. We've also wandered into questions that have no clean answers. What happens when memory fades? What happens when it's taken from us by time, or trauma, or illness? Are we still ourselves? Can we be? The hard truth is we don't know. But in watching others, in holding the hand of someone who no longer knows your name, you start to see something deeper, that love does not always need memory to survive. It lives in tone, in instinct, in recognition that goes beyond names and dates, a soft touch, a gentle voice, a familiar rhythm. The body remembers, the heart remembers, even when the mind cannot. And that too is memory, just in another form. We've considered the science. We've floated into speculation. We've asked what might happen if we could implant memories, download them, trade them, delete them, and what that would mean for selfhood, for truth, for ethics, for empathy. But here, at the end of it, maybe the most radical idea is also the simplest. That memory doesn't need to be perfect to be sacred. You may forget the date, but not the feeling. You may lose the details, but not the way someone made you feel safe. You may misremember the event entirely, but still hold on to the change it caused in you. And perhaps that's enough. You're not the sum of your memories. You're the shape they've carved in you. And that shape is still growing, still soft, still listening. In fact, right now, in this moment, you are making memories of the stillness in the room, of the rhythm of these words, of how your breath feels slower than it did an hour ago. And maybe you won't remember this tomorrow. Maybe the details will fade, but maybe, just maybe, a part of this will stay. The feeling of being held in thought, the permission to wonder, the quiet reassurance that you're not alone in remembering, because we all carry fragments. We all forget things we thought we'd remember forever. We all remember things we thought we'd forgotten for good. We all walk through life with a constellation of moments, some shining brightly, some barely glowing, and we use them to navigate the night. Memory is how we find our way home, and so we return to the beginning. Not to answer the question, how do we remember, but to sit with it, to live inside it, to feel it like a current beneath the surface of our lives. You remember because you are human, because you feel, because you've lived, because something once moved through you so deeply that it left a mark, not on the skin, not even on the brain, but on something older, something deeper, and that mark becomes a compass, a keepsake, a thread. So the next time a moment catches you off guard, a smell, a colour, a song, and you feel that soft jolt of recognition, let it happen. Don't chase it. Just feel it. That's memory doing its quiet work. That's time bend us back to touch you, gently for a moment. That's your life, remembering itself. So, where are you now? Are you still awake? Or somewhere in that warm space between thought and dream? Is your room dim? Quiet? Familiar? Does the night feel different than it did before? Just a little? Just enough? You've travelled far, without moving, backward, inward, across timelines and daydreams, and if you're still here, still breathing with me, then maybe some part of you remembers the question we asked at the very beginning. How do we remember? And maybe now, you don't need the answer. Maybe the wondering itself was enough. If any part of this gave you stillness, or made you feel seen, or simply helped the thoughts slow down, I hope you'll carry it gently into sleep, or into the next moment of your day. And if you feel like supporting this soft corner of the world, this space where science meets quiet, you're welcome to like, or subscribe, or share this with someone who needs a little peace. You don't have to, but I'll remember it if you do. And now, all that's left is this, a thank you for your presence, for your listening, for your heart, and your memories, and your mystery, and for letting me be a small voice in your night. So sleep well, fellow traveller, wherever and whenever you are, in every version of your story, in every echo of your light. You are remembered, you are enough, and you are home. Good night.